Hi, I'm James Woodard Mills, freelance journalist and independent media producer. I'm the host of the blog podcast series, The Joy Chip Project, and contributor to Specialty News, also called Snooze, the outdoor industry online trade magazine. And we're at the Outdoor Retailer Snow Show here in beautiful Denver, Colorado. And my guest today is José González, a good friend and also the founder, director emeritus of Latino Outdoors. Jose, welcome to Snooze Live.
Hello, thank you. It's good to be here. Hello to everybody, and it's good to be here in Denver from Outdoor Retailer.
Well, one of the things that Jose and I have been working on for a long time is the issue of diversity in outdoor recreation and environmental conservation. And through the work that I've done as a journalist and Jose has done as an activist, I'd like to think that we've made some pretty substantive progress on this issue. I'm really curious, just from the outset of this conversation, where do you think we are right now? How are things going when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the outdoor industry?
You know, I'll try to put it maybe in a metaphor that's appropriate, which is, imagine you're going to hike that mountain, if you will. I think for the longest time, it's amazing how much work and prep goes into a climb a lot of the times. And ask any outdoor enthusiast that does climbing or hiking, and they will lay out everything for you in terms of this is how I prepare for it, here's my emergency plan, like it's set. And I often say, how often do we do that when it comes to the conversations around equity, inclusion, and engagement? Because for the longest time, I think people just couldn't. They kind of got this idea of this mountain, but they're like, yeah, we don't go there, we don't hike that. You started to get a couple people kind of trailblazing. And I think where we are now is we have different climbers at different points in the mountain, but also beginning to understand the scope of, this is not a single thing. This is also, we have to think about the relationship we have with the space and with each other. Like all of these, I use all these analogies to be able to say that we have a spectrum of engagement right now, and it's hard to point to one single individual organization that says they're doing it all right, because that's not the point. But I think the best, most important thing is like there's actually movement now.
Right. Well, give me some examples. I mean, what kind of movement are you seeing now?
Well, if you look at, first of all, if you look at the trade show, Outdoor Retailer or even Outdoor Industry Association, some of the key things is that they're using the language a lot more, right? The fact that you even have terms like equity and inclusion embedded in some of the programming, there's been panels, presentations and discussions. Canberra Outdoors has a working equity group as well that's looking to provide some of these best practices and frames. You literally also had just more individuals and leaders of color attending the trade show. And then if you expand that out to the industry and look at the brands, a lot more brands are both engaging with community-based organizations. They are changing some of their marketings, like literally who gets to be on the cover, and more so to be able to understand how to format campaigns that will include and engage community of colors, especially as part of the mainstream and not necessarily as some form of like niche marketing.
Right, and we've been talking about this, as I said, for a really, really, really long time. And this is Outdoor Retailer number almost 40 or 50 for me. I've been doing this for that long. I can definitely see that there are more people of color on the floor. I think we're seeing more people of color in marketing and management positions. What's the goal? I mean, what is the ultimate aspiration for diversity, equity, and inclusion in this business?
I mean, without trying to be too glib, the goal is that it doesn't matter, right?
Absolutely.
We are at a state that whatever systemic barriers aren't there, it includes everything from, even though, like you said, you've been doing this for 40 plus shows, and that question or the idea has always come up around, I'm the only one.
Right.
Or like, I can count the number of people, or we all get together for lunch and then that's it.
Right.
And still understand the questions of like maybe not feeling welcome, or like as if you are intruding in some space that wasn't created for you. And the fact that for some people for whom it's their first time, they still feel that, lets me know that that's a lot of the work that we have to do. So the goal is everything from an athlete, a sponsored athlete, a community-based leader, an individual of color who's their first time at Outdoor Retailer, that they don't feel that, or they understand there's a network of support that immediately gets you there. And then the ultimate goal is that from the bottom to the top, you have accurate representation, not just in who's on the cover, but also the content creators and the decision makers behind those campaigns and strategies.
And I think that's what we really need. And I want to point out a really interesting article that was published in the most recent issue of, actually the very first issue of The Voice. It's a new publication that Snooze is creating through AIM Media. And specifically, I want to bring everyone's attention to an article written by my friend and colleague Ron Griswold regarding his experience as a person of color in the space, having to work for free. You know, because part of what's interesting about this whole conversation is that a lot of people are doing it because they think it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And sadly, though, when it comes to engaging people of color as professionals, we're paying them in exposure, you know, as opposed to cold, hard cash.
Right.
That is pretty much antithetical to, you know, working in any industry or a business. You know, how can we fix that? I mean, what can we do to hopefully, you know, create engagement opportunities that aren't philanthropy, but are actually just good working business practices?
Well, I think you hit it right there in terms of business practices. You know, a couple friends were sharing an image of saying, you know, and you're gonna get some exposure. You'll be paid in exposure, and the reaction is like, "Yay! I'm so glad because my rent is actually 800 exposures." Right? But I think the fact is, when it comes to whatever community engagement, equity, and inclusion, diversification of the outdoor movement, is to have people understand you don't think twice when you think about business decisions in terms of investments, in terms of who you hire, when you produce a campaign. You know, I would say no reputable content production team goes up and say, we'll do it for free. Right? You have a budget. And so one of the things that you can say is budgets, for example, are moral documents. So if you don't have that included in terms of how you will pay talent that is diverse and representative, if you're not accounting for the fact that you're asking people to refer you to other people to having campaigns, like all of those are not questioned outside of that space as practices.
Right.
And yet to get it convoluted as, well, it's the right thing to do, or you care for your community, I said those are not exclusive things. You can care and understand that there's still a business and economic necessity to be able to make this work.
Right. I think part of what makes this a good business conversation is that we need to talk about, you know, things like mentorship. We need to talk about recruitment. You know, we need to talk about how, you know, we go about not only getting people of color into our organizations and in our businesses, but also helping them figure out how they're going to be successful within the organization. You know, how do we fix that? I mean, how do we create an environment where if I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, that when I go to work in the outdoor industry, I'm not putting at risk all of the investment that my family put into getting me through school.
Exactly.
You know, how do we get past that notion? That's a real question.
There's a phrase that especially for even first generation, or just leaders of colors, they're the first one to graduate, right? Or they're the first ones going into a career that's underrepresented. It might be in STEM, it might be in business, whatever it might be. In the sense of being an astronaut, right? Not just a trailblazer, but literally you need to have the protective gear to survive in this maybe hostile space.
Right.
And yet we say, well, you also have to remember that astronaut has to have like Houston back on the ground. You need to have a team that when something goes wrong, we got you. And so what we need to fix with that is when we look at equity and inequity is acknowledging that systems have already been in place to help others that have come before from different privileged communities, right? So we need to kind of close that equity gap by being able to say intentionally we will create not just an internship, but even a fellowship or a mentorship program that opens up that space that otherwise you're not going to know or see until you get there.
Right.
You know, it could be a fellowship with an executive director. It could be a fellowship with an entrepreneur. It's all of this information that nobody tells you about, down to what should be a rate that we should be working for when we, you know, make X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And so what's been critical now has been two fronts. One is as a community for us to be more transparent with each other and help each other. And two is pushing the current outdoor industry to say, this is not just the right thing to do, but this is going to help you stay on top of the curve, or the head of the curve, with what is just normatively a more multicultural,
See, and that's a big part of it right there, because, you know, you and I personally have been encouraging people to get engaged and involved in this. But then there's the question, not just what the industry can do, but what can our communities do?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I don't do enough.
Yeah.
I mean, and I kind of wish we can get people, who are listening to this conversation to help answer that question. What can we do? Are there opportunities out there that we're not aware of, that we haven't taken advantage of yet? Can we say, I've got a business, I've got a marketing firm, I've got a project.
Yeah.
How can we help each other to be better qualified to occupy this space in a meaningful way?
When, often in voting, we encourage people to say vote, right? Literally go to the ballot box. And you'll have people say, well, that doesn't do anything, right? That doesn't matter. But I tell people, you vote with the ballot, you vote with your time, you vote with your money, you vote with all of these different things that every day you get up and say, if I have the given 12 hours, what percentage of that am I investing in another peer or another leader or community of color? It can literally be go and purchase something at a store, right? That's minority owned. But it can also be answering those emails. When people reach out via social media, for example, that's increased a lot to be able to say, I just want to say how much I admire what you do. And you can respond and be able to say, thank you for reaching out. Let me know when I can be available for something. That can make a huge difference a lot of times for a lot of, especially young leadership that's entering the space.
Absolutely. Well, we got a question online from Richard Rojas.
Excellent.
And the question is, tell us about LOs, so Latino Outdoors, national campaign, Nuestros National Park, and how POC need to change the narrative from negative media on impacts to closed national parks to how we can become environmental stewards and partners.
Yeah. So, good question. So Latino Outdoors launched this campaign, kind of awareness, social media communications campaign, as a call to action in response to the shutdown and everything that happened in terms of national parks being, literally and figuratively trashed.
Right.
And the question was, we really have done so much work to break out of the perception that people of color are problematic in the outdoors, right? That we don't care, we're not good stewards, we leave trash, we don't know leave no trace principles.
We play loud music.
Right? We're just disruptive.
Right.
And flip that to be able to say, actually, first of all, we're very responsible stewards.
Right.
A lot of the times we are not afforded the access to information that others have, but a lot of the times also it's our own leadership to step up and be able to say, here's the way in which we know we are asking for greater access, for more equity in this space, and that we are responsible stewards of this space as well. Right. So including us isn't like you are helping us or fixing something that's wrong with us. Is literally being able to open the space to say, when we care about building on the conservation success of the past, it's going to include people of color.
Right.
And guess what? We're a lot more ready than you might presume we're not.
Absolutely. And we've always been here.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing that we really need to wrap our heads around, that environmental conservation didn't start in 2008.
Exactly.
For people of color. I mean, this conversation has literally been going on since the dawn of America. And so the question ultimately becomes, how do we go about engaging this new generation of young people who think that they aren't part of the narrative, to not only embrace that narrative, but to perhaps create a new narrative, and try to decide exactly what that's going to look like. How do we do that? And storytelling, I think, is, as a professional journalist, that's what I do. You're a storyteller. What are the stories that we're going to tell in the future?
The reason this is critical, and especially in such an information-rich age, right, through social media, through what you can find through Google and search engines, it's not a question of that there is a lack of information now. It's about how to critically engage with it, and then also understanding that this is culture making, and especially for young and younger demographics. What is visible about what is possible, about the potential and why you're there. I often use the example recently of Black Panther, right? Like, this wasn't a movie made for Black America and African American families. It was made for everybody, but it was very intentional in who included in the production and the story that it told that was so much different than other stories about kind of Black identity. And guess what? It was still a corporate production. It was made to make money. This was Marvel and Disney. Lot of money.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it was nominated for an Oscar.
Right.
And then you also have films like Coco. That told a very beautiful story about Dias de las Muertes and the story of Latin culture.
Yeah, and the production team got called out early on that, by the way, for those that don't know, because anytime you're going to enter a cultural space and everything from Columbusing to cultural appropriation to you name it, and so they actually brought in some consultants, Mexican and Mexican-American consultants, to be able to say, like, yeah, don't do that, or if you're going to do this, then this is the way we should approach it, and leave it to the and the audiences respond in kind.
Absolutely, and then and we can now start making lists, like Moana.
Yeah,
and I don't know if anybody else notices, but like Moana's like the first Disney movie that doesn't have a single white person in it.
There you go.
Not even the villain in Moana is a white person, which is really changing the narrative in a really powerful and meaningful way.
And it makes a difference because we live in narrative and culture all the time.
Right.
News, for example, is a powerful one of that. And people that are aware of this, the difference when you see a person of color and a white individual who commit the same action or even sometimes same crime, so to speak, are treated very differently.
Exactly.
And that is pervasive in how we will respond to actions and campaigns and whether we really believe that it's meant for us.
Right. And I think that once we start shifting our role in the narrative, that's when things ultimately change. But at the end of the day, I think that what is really going to be part of this is making sure that the power structure is prepared to give up some of its power.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and empower others to exercise power of their own.
And when I do equity and inclusion work, I said, if you're ready for it, then I start with the big question, which is literally that. What power are you willing to give up?
Right.
If your answer to that is like none, then I'm like, that's a very going to be different trajectory and conversation than you say, I'm ready, but I don't know what it is.
Right.
Or I want to understand what that looks like for our work.
Right.
And then also to let people know, it's not a zero-sum type of, well, you lose and we win. It's like this transition needs to happen so that we can all succeed in that way.
Right. And I don't want to call anybody out on this, but I think a really good example of that is today's panel discussion during the industry breakfast, where we had a global conversation about climate change that did not include people of color, nor did it refer to people of color. And I think that it's really important that we talk about this as a narrative that has to be inclusive. So a conversation about climate change has got to include people of color, because people of color will be most disproportionately impacted by a changing climate. And so any change or practice that would correct that would have to include them as well.
And like I said, they already are. And it makes a difference in terms of policy, in terms of where we're going to recreate, in terms of who has access to spaces. We can go down the list and say there's a difference between how Katrina and Puerto Rico most recently were treated in response to these disasters compared to some of the hurricanes in the Northeast, for example.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation. We can probably talk about this all day. In fact, we'll probably continue to talk about this. In fact, Snooze will continue to have fabulous points of engagements and stories and interviews like this. So please stay tuned. Enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and pick up a copy of The Voice if you haven't yet. When you're at the show, you can also get it online. Hit us up at snoozenet.com. Thanks for listening.
Hasta luego.